And there fell a great star from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell upon the river, and the name of the star was Wormwood, and many men died.
Revelation 8:10. Are you saying that this is about the apocalypse?
The book of Revelation is one of the books of the Bible as we know it today, the Christian Bible. It's the last book, and it talks about the end time. The four horsemen of the apocalypse each represent symbols of things that occur when societies fall apart in a kind of a poetic way. The first one that's mentioned is the white horse. And the person on the horse is carrying a bow. Scholars suggest that the white horse is, when he conquests, he's going to sweep out the Romans and it'll be a happy moment. But after you remove the oppressor, the one who's controlling society, and in good ways and bad, and you can see this maybe when Saddam Hussein fell. You know, he had society organized, and now that he's gone, there's this great sense of freedom, but the social order collapses. So the next horse is in red, and the horseman is in red as well. And fiery red means violence. That could be civil war, what happens when the social order collapses. The third horse is in all black. The horseman is carrying a scale in his hand. It's showing just maybe a day's ration of grain. When there's disorder, there's no food. So the third horseman is known as famine. The fourth horseman is depicted as a pale color, which is a sign of death or dying. Given famine and warfare, dissolution of culture, death is certainly the end point. So the fourth horseman is death. They represent what happens when societies collapse.
This year's by far, for the writers, been the most challenging season of the show by a long shot.
Every season on Supernatural is a bit of a game of chicken. So we dangled the apocalypse, so we felt we had to go there.
You can't mount it with the scope that it requires.
You know, since we're sort of restricted into what we can actually do, we can't do a disaster movie.
The Bible gives us the language and some of the images and some of the events.
We can't show the earth consumed in fire, but we can show what happened in Haiti, H1N1 flu.
Around that time, as we were going in the writer's room, it was like, that's just when swine flu was hitting its stride. I was listening to the radio, and swine flu this and swine flu that. And I came in, I said, you know, I think that's how we're going to do the apocalypse.
There's moments that are going around us, you know, any day that points to an apocalyptic. If you put them all together, it looks like the apocalypse is happening.
Hurricane Kinley unexpectedly slamming into the Galveston area.
Announced a successful test of the North Korean nuclear.
A series of tremors.
Swine flu.
And swine flu indeed becomes like a big part of the mythology this season in terms of it's the plan that Pestilence is up to. He's using H1N1 as a way to Trojan horse the Croatoan virus.
So the first plague is fear. And he goes and he spreads fear, and everyone is very, very frightened, and it works for us, I think, as a group of viewing people, because we are in a state of fear about swine flu.
Who's to say you're not looking at this current world in growing tensions with Middle Eastern nations in which it's sort of the biblical cradle of the world, and disease, and hurricanes, and bizarre weather, and who's to say it's not the apocalypse going on right now as we speak anyway?
In Supernatural, the four horsemen are sort of called when Lucifer rises.
And when he touches down, we're talking four horsemen, red oceans, fiery skies, the greatest hits.
It was a way for us to make the story bigger in the apocalyptic view if we introduced these guys one at a time.
With war, it was important for him to blend in and to seem like a townsperson.
Showtime for the meat suits. War was, you know, Titus Welliver was a bit of a con man, very charming, and really gets this town to be at war with itself by what he can put in their heads.
Don't you hurt her. Don't you give me my mom back, you black-eyed bitch.
I'm waiting to hook up with my siblings. I've got 3.
For what we generally do, famine is on the outside of Arch for us. That is his jet black, you know, wheelchair and his like oxygen tubes.
Famine was the spookiest guy we've ever had by far. And that episode is probably as spooky as we're gonna get.
His physicality was described in the script, but then beautifully realized by casting and by Jim Otis and by just like, you know, how it worked out and by the directing and all that good stuff.
But Pestilence, it's all about getting the Croton virus out there, which turns people into meat-eating, zombie, crazy nut bags.
The nation is terrified of swine flu. They want our vaccine. They need our vaccine. It's called demand, people. Now supply.
That's a story point that's been sitting around since season 2, and we never really paid it off. It was like, it started as this zombie virus in season 2, and then I would ask, but what about Croatoan? What are they doing with that Croatoan virus? Like, we said this whole episode about it, and we just dropped it, and like 2 years later, I still couldn't let it go. And finally, Ben Edlund came in to pitch me this idea, I think just to shut me up.
They create a situation where all the people in the country come knocking their door down and saying, give me the Croatoan, because they put it into these, you know, vaccine inhalers. And that's the way that it's a very smart way of getting people scared and then making them, fear, ultimately, turns them into zombies.
Death is my very favorite horseman of them all, because to me, he's the most unexpected. He's the most powerful, he's the oldest.
When Death comes and he lands and almost pretends to take a holiday there. That episode was the equivalent of Death making a joke, which is a very terrifying situation if a creature is of that status and power and capable of finding those sort of things funny. Because ultimately, what was he doing? He's kind of just like cracking his knuckles and surveying this sort of lay of the land. If you picture Death waking up into itself and taking a moment to remember what it is, the unlife.
Our version of the Horsemen, of course, instead of riding horses of various colors, they tend to have things like muscle cars.
This show is about a road, basically. I liked it in the Dark Side of the Moon. We got to talk about a kind of larger sense of what the road was.
What do you see?
Nothing, my dash. I'm in my car. I'm on a road.
All right, a road. For you, it's a road. Follow it, Dean. You'll find Sam. Follow.
There's a road, and there's a rest stop, and there's a house, and there is a car. So if the boys are on the road, their whole life is expressed by the American road, and night on the road, and day in the motel, and all that stuff, then their horsemen need to relate to the road as well. And this is like a car culture show.
And the color of their vehicles is matched the color of the horse it's supposed to be in the Bible.
We introduced the Horseman of War driving a red Mustang because the Horseman of War rides a red horse.
Famine drives this, you know, hungry SUV.
And then will come Famine, riding on a black steed.
They need to be expressed in terms of modern vehicles for them to be on Supernatural.
We decided that horsemen were too powerful to be killed, and that you couldn't just chop them up with a demon knife or an angel blade or anything like that. But perhaps you could disempower them, and we decided to give War a ring as a way of displaying his power and a thing that we could chop off of him.
If our heroes, Sam and Dean, can attain all four, they can create a cage for Lucifer.
Because these creatures are extremely powerful, it's the equivalent of a chink in the scaly armor of a dragon.
You can't kill War, kiddos. Oh, we know.
You need some means by which you can have humans who are of only a certain amount of strength and a certain amount of impact, that they can affect them. So the rings were that.
So, pit stop on Mount Doom.
Someone reading the book of Revelation in the first century would recognize horses as an arrival of a message, and in this case, maybe two images on top of one another, a message and a message of doom.
In my opinion, once you step into what we're doing, then you step into a relatively small library of other things that have attempted to do this. And I think it's a cool place to be, and very few television shows have done it.
When you're up against pestilence and war itself, like the personification of war and the personification of famine and death himself, and when you're up against these sizable characters, they bring weight with them. They bring scope with them inherently.
Next to Lucifer himself, you can't get a bigger marquee value than the Four Horsemen.
If the apocalypse happens or is happening on Earth, it won't be supernatural. It's just us messing up, really. Like, not listening to repeated warnings by scientists and good people who say, stop shooting at each other. We don't really need horsemen or anything like that. Stories like the ones we tell on Supernatural are just a way to talk about that with enough distance to be able to enjoy the story and not feel so terrible and horrible that we have to just end the discussion and go cry in the corner. But all of this stuff is happening on this mundane level now that's kind of, it's actually upsetting.
Oh,